created for something more. We're made for something greater than ourselves.
We are formed with purpose and set apart for a cause.
We are designed to give glory and forged to give praise.
We are fashioned to give honour and moulded with grace.
We are made to live as a living sacrifice.
We are made to lift up His name. We are created to worship.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Let me begin today, as has been my habit, with some positive news. You are much loved children of God.
release your working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop, you never stop working. You never stop, you never stop working. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you
However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows. When the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's days. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings, right up to the time Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. Two men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, the other left. Two women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, the other left. So you too must keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming. Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when a burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. You also must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. A faithful servant, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give the responsibility of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there will be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all he owns. But what if the servant is evil and thinks, my master won't be back home for a while, and he begins beating the other servants, partying, and getting drunk? The master will return unannounced and unexpected, and he will cut the servant to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids, who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra oil. When the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him." All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil, because our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourself." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him to marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the other 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back, "Believe me, I don't know you." So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return.
It seems that every generation has some who seek to predict the very moment that Christ will return, the second coming of Jesus. Yes, it's talked about in the scriptures. Yes, we're told to expect it, to be ready for it, to remain faithful, going about God's work until that moment that he does come, that he returns. But we're not told to predict the hour and the day of his return. And yet, it seems every generation has those who believe that they know what the scriptures clearly tell us that they don't. Verse 42 of Matthew chapter 24 says, "Keep watch, for you don't know what day your Lord is coming." Again in verse 44, we are called to be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. And then in verse 45 to 50, we're taught to continually, faithfully going on about God's work, because the Master will return unannounced and unexpected. The key truth that Jesus is communicating in this passage is that no one knows the day or the hour when he will in fact return. Knowing this should shape our attitudes. We need to be constantly looking out, expecting for his return. We need to be ready for his return. We need to be actively engaged in serving him by sharing the gospel, by sharing his love among those we meet, so that we are found faithful upon his return, so that we're not caught unprepared to meet him face to face. Jesus shares 3 short stories to highlight these points before finishing his teaching by summing it all up with the parable of the unprepared bridesmaids. The first of these 3 illustrations, we're told to keep watch. 2 people were working side by side, and one mysteriously disappears. The second illustration tells us to be ready, that a house owner, knowing that they're about to be robbed, would remain alert and ready to prevent the action of the thief. The third story tells us to be faithful, just like a vineyard worker who is left in charge should be. Richard, Ben and David are going to share their take on these 3 points for us.
Dr. A.J. Gordon tells of two sisters who were very close to one another. One was a Christian and the other was not. The Christian girl was constantly seeking ways to lead the unbelieving one to the Lord Jesus Christ. One night she persuaded her to attend a church service with her. The minister preached from Matthew 24, where it says that when Jesus comes in the air to call his sons from the earth, one will be taken and the other left. He preached a stirring sermon. The Christian girl hoped very much that the sin would lead her sister to salvation, but the unbelieving one did not seem to be impressed by what had been said. The two girls slept in the same room together. That night, the Christian one was so burdened for her sister that she could not sleep. She crept from the bed and went to another room to pray. In the meantime, the unsaved girl awoke, and missing her sister, wondered where she was. As she lay there, the sin bit uppermost in her thoughts, she wondered if her Christian had been taken. The horror of had been left behind made such an impression on her that she cried out to the Lord for salvation. Such a scene will be a reality. One will be taken and one will be left. It is so easy for us to get caught up in all the things that distract us from what is of greatest importance, things that slow us down in life. There are always bills to pay, schedules to keep, difficulties to navigate, and families to feed and jobs to do. We can so easily get caught up in the mundane mess of these things that we lose sight of the glorious hope on the horizon. It seems so long ago to us that Jesus lived and died, we can easily lull ourselves into thinking that he won't return in our lifetime, much less at any moment. We lose our sense of urgency, passion, and expectation. Jesus wants us to always be watching out to live with expectation. He is forever at the door, just beyond our boundaries of space and time, waiting to usher in his fulfilled kingdom in power and glory. Our job is not to know the day this will happen, but to be ready any day it may occur, and to live our lives full of good deeds and holy anticipation of its soon coming. We are called to keep watch.
In these verses, we are called to be ready for Christ's return, and warned that he will be coming when we do not expect him. So what do we need to do to be ready? What does that mean? Well, we are told that blessed is the slave who is found doing the tasks that are assigned to him. But what tasks have been assigned to us? Well, Jesus assigned us the Great Commission, telling us to go to the four corners of the world and make disciples. And he said that the two greatest commandments were to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, and equally to love your neighbour as yourself. So we need to ask ourselves, are we loving God with all our heart? Are we right with God? Or are there things in our hearts or our minds that we're putting before God? Do we have idols in our lives that are taking away from God? Are we showing love to our neighbours? Are we showing the love that God shows to us, to our community, our friends, and our family? And are we sharing the good news and making disciples in the world? So I need to ask myself, am I ready if Christ returned now? When he returns, would he be happy with what he finds in my heart, with the tasks he finds me doing? Are you ready?
Being faithful, even when people are not looking. During this COVID adventure, I'd like to report sterling success on this front, but it has been a lesson in progress for me. I mark my own scorecard D-. Must do better. I'd like to report that I've read my Bible every day, that I've prayed every day, that I've checked my action and attitudes against our holy benchmark, Jesus, every day, but I have not. Vain imaginations perhaps, but I've always thought that if a real test comes, that I would somehow miraculously rise to the occasion and do God's bidding. But I've realised after last lockdown that the situation we find ourselves in at any stage of life and at any stage of freedom that we might currently be experiencing, this is the right time. There is no golden opportunity. All events are and must be used as opportunities. We must be faithful in the very smallest of things. There has been progress. I no longer wildly gesticulate and loudly exclaim to the TV exactly what I think of the current government during the news hour, much to the horror of my family. But I still have managed to blurt out with some animation, what did you think would happen by placing leaky as sieves MIQ facilities in the middle of the country's most populous city? My current melodramatics were arrested when I watched a YouTube clip of a street preacher standing on a chili bin as if a soapbox. He was imploring his listeners that violence is not a part of Christ's way and that all Christians abhor it. It was a critical point that he was making to emphasize the uniqueness of the Christian position. Satan, on cue, organized a punter at that point to kick the soapbox from under him. The Christian tumbled, barely managing to maintain his footing and balance, and then carried on with his audience without missing a beat, not reacting or retaliating against his adversary. His point was amplified by his unsaid conduct and actions. He was a wise man who had indeed kept his wick trimmed and had oil aplenty in reserve. I have much to learn. Where did I get the sense of entitlement from? When persecution comes, will there be any sense of fairness? Was Christ treated fairly 2,000 years ago? No, quite the opposite. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, I must arm myself with the same resolve, because the one who has suffered in the body is done with sin. 1 Peter 4:1, paraphrased. I must permit my nature and character to be shaped by God's Spirit living within me, more so when nobody is looking, because with utter certainty, the one who made my eyes can see.
To reinforce the 3 points of the 3 short stories, Jesus then tells the parable of the 10 foolish bridesmaids. In this parable, 10 bridesmaids go out to meet a bridegroom at a wedding. We need to understand that in Jesus' day, there were 3 stages to a Jewish wedding. The first was the engagement, a formal agreement made by the fathers. The second was a betrothal, a ceremony where mutual promises are made. The third was the marriage, approximately 1 year later, when the bridegroom would come at an unexpected time for his bride. Paul tells us when the bridegroom came, the bridesmaids who were attending the bride would go out to meet the bridegroom with lit oil lamps to illuminate his way and show him, to lead him to his companions into the house and to the woman who was to be his bride. Some may ask, why 10 bridesmaids and not another number? Reportedly, Talmudic authorities said there were usually 10 lamps in such a bridal procession. So it was a common size for a wedding party. In Jesus' parable, the first 2 stages have already taken place. Now the wedding party, the 10 bridesmaids, wait for the coming of the bridegroom for his bride. We discover some of this bridal party were wise, and they were prepared for the coming of the bridegroom. However, some in the wedding party were foolish and were unprepared. Bruce describes these 2 groups as wise and foolish, good but not bad, but prudent and imprudent, thoughtful and thoughtless. All 10 of these bridesmaids evidently fell asleep. Why? Because the bridegroom was delayed. However, the wise ones were still prepared to act immediately when they were unexpectedly awakened. The foolish bridesmaids, however, were not prepared at all. The 5 foolish bridesmaids appeared to be ready for the bridegroom because they had their lamps with them in their hands, but they were really not ready because they hadn't taken enough oil with them. We read that the wise maidens even had extra supply of oil, just in case the groom was delayed. At midnight, there was a cry that was heard, "The bridegroom is coming." At this very unexpected hour, the bridegroom came for the wedding. The wedding party immediately began to prepare their lamps for lighting. "Give us some of your oil for our lamps. They're going out," the foolish bridesmaids cried. But the others rejected their pleas. Why? Because they themselves would then become unprepared. They would be unprepared for the task of meeting the bridegroom that they had waited so long for. It was too late to turn their lack of preparedness around. The penalty was severe for these foolish bridesmaids. They were not allowed to come into the wedding, and the door was shut against them in the strongest of terms. The bridegroom saying, "I don't know you." The warning to keep watch out for the return of the bridegroom, to be ready for his return, and to be found fulfilling the duties and the call that had been given, is a warning. It's a warning to all of us. France says, to see the bridegroom as Jesus himself seems warranted. So the message for us today is that Jesus is the bridegroom and he is returning. We know it when we don't know exactly when, but he's on his way. We need to be expectant of his return, to watch out for it. We need to be prepared for his return. That means to get ourselves in a right relationship with God. And finally, we need to be about his work here on earth, to be found faithfully serving him, completing the work that he has given us as his much loved children and followers. Spurgeon says, when that door is once shut, it will never be opened. There are some, he claims, who dream about an opening of that door after death for those who have died unrepentant. But there is nothing in scriptures to warrant such an expectation. Any such hope, he says, is a delusion and a snare. So we need to heed Jesus' words. Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. The point of these parables is simple: to be watchful, to be ready, to be found faithful. For the price of failure in these things is too high.